Hi, my name is Bo Powell, and for my presentation too, I will be talking about a company that did the wrong thing in the face of an ethical dilemma, and I will be talking about the Enron energy scandal. Who is Enron? Enron was formed in 1985 following a merger between Houston Natural Gas and Internorth Incorporated. It was an energy trading and utilities company that perpetrated one of the biggest accounting frauds in history. And before it declared bankruptcy in 2001, it was at one point, according to Forbes, the seventh largest corporation in the United States. I want to talk about some top executives that worked at Enron. First off, this guy's name is Kenneth Lay. He was the founder and CEO of Enron, and he collected more than 220 million in cash between 1998 and 2001. Kenneth Lay essentially started the beginning of the downfall of Enron by not putting an end to the first ethical dilemma that occurred. It was discovered in Enron that two oil traders were committing fraud, and he encouraged it to continue rather than stopping it. Once news went public of those oil traders committing fraud, Kenneth Lay knew he needed to bring in a new man due to those oil traders making him millions of dollars each year. So he brought in this guy, Jeffrey Skilling. He was hired by Lay to be the CEO and chairman of Enron Finance. He started moving the company in a new direction and pushed aggressive investment strategies like turning the company into a stock market for natural gas. He helped Enron become the biggest wholesaler of gas and electricity and introduced the next ethical dilemma I want to talk about to the company of mark-to-market accounting. So Jeffrey Skilling introduced this method of mark-to-market accounting to Enron, which is a method of measuring the fair value of accounts that can fluctuate over time, such as assets and liabilities. While this is normally a generally accepted method of accounting, the way Enron used it was a little different than most firms. The way Enron used mark-to-market accounting was that they would write down profits on the day deals were signed, and it didn't matter if they received a penny from the deal. So an example of this would be if a deal was done for $50 million, they would write down $50 million in profit that day to their books without receiving a penny. And then it did not matter if the deals fell through because they would still have 50 million in profits on their books. So this meant that Enron was worth way more on paper than it had actually earned. So what Enron did was they hid all of this debt that they were accumulating through deals that had fallen through in special purpose vehicles that were used to hide these toxic assets and debt from investors and creditors. They cooked the books, like I talked about, through mark to market accounting. And through all this, they got the value of the company and their share price all the way up to $90.75. An example of one of the mark to market accounting deals that went bad was the Blockbuster deal. Blockbuster came to Enron and worked together. They wanted to work together to provide the first streaming service to customers, which essentially is what Netflix is today. But after they were working through this deal, they discovered that the technology was just not quite ready for a streaming service to be sent out to the public. So this $110 million deal ultimately fell through, but according to the Enron books, they still wrote it down as $53 million in profit. Another example of a bad mark to market deal that Enron did was this energy deal in India. In 1992, Enron built a $3 billion natural gas energy plant in Dabhol, India. This project was sort of doomed from the beginning as corrupt politicians sent the project through, even though there wasn't really enough funding there to have it done. This project was supposed to be the poster child for economic liberalization and was at the time the single largest direct foreign investment in India's history. In June of 2001, the agreement was broken off due to energy being too expensive in India. And after some more digging was done into the books, this entire time, Enron only had one customer, the Maharashtra state government. That was the only customer that funded this, but they still were able to file $200 million in profit on their books. Now I want to talk about two specific ethical dilemmas that occurred in Enron Energy. The first was one I mentioned earlier, where two oil traders were found to be gambling on the company's behalf. They, according to records, were gambling well beyond what their capabilities were. They were counts and essentially stealing money from the company, and they were also manipulating the company's earnings to do so, which in turn looked very good to investors. So rather than originally just firing these two oil traders, as I mentioned earlier, Kenneth Lay, the founder, actually sent them a letter asking them to keep doing what they were doing because as they were manipulating earnings, they were just making the company so much money, they were almost an asset. The next ethical dilemma in Enron that I want to talk about is abusive behavior of employees. So, as these mark to market deals continued, analysts became very skeptical and were questioning these future profits that top execs were putting on the books. And these analysts were fired by Jeffrey Skilling as they questioned these. And then also during that time of questioning, uh, top executives were telling employees to put more and more money into the Enron stock price as they were dumping their stock and making millions. The one specific ethical approach that I want to talk about that I feel could have really helped Enron is the utilitarian approach. The utilitarian approach essentially has the goal of creating the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people. And in Enron's sense, they essentially gave themselves the greatest amount of good. I really think that if founder Kenneth Lay and CEO Jeffrey Skilling would have just thought about the shareholders and other people and employees in the company and creating some good for them, they would have saved them. It would have saved all those people from themselves and stopped Enron from continuing to dig a deeper hole into financial debt. Something actually beneficial that came as a result of this Enron bankruptcy was the SOX Reform Act, which establishes requirements for proper financial record keeping for public companies and gives them penalties of as much up to 25 years in prison for noncompliance. So essentially, this makes the CEO and CFO personally certify financial records. So Jeffrey Skilling would have had to personally certify these financial records rather than being able to say that he had no idea and no responsibility for what had occurred. And then these are my sources, and I want to thank you for listening to my presentation and hope that you learned a lot about ethical dilemmas and specifically what occurred in the Enron energy scandal. Thank you.